Great, Rose, thank you so much. How's everyone doing, okay? Alright, we're going to do one more, and then we're going to take a break. So if, John and James, if you will. Are you coming?
Hi there, my name is James, and this is John. We're two members of the artist collective LuckyPDF, which is formerly a group of 4, sometime a group of 3, and expands and contracts to as is appropriate for the project that we're working on. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about some of the projects that we've worked on over the last 5 years and try to think about the culture at the time that maybe has informed the way, the environment in which these projects were made, the wider cultural conditions, and a little bit about our network that we try to become a spokesperson for.
The video you're looking at is a few different things, but one of the things it is an example of a project we ran called LuckyPDF TV. LuckyPDF TV, we did various different iterations over a number of years. The one we're looking at is we did a venue called the Woodmill for an event called BYOB London. But LuckyPDF TV started out as us looking for a way to present the work of the artists who were our friends and the artists who we were working around. A lot of that work existing in performance and video, and looking for better ways of presenting performance and video and presenting them together than gallery exhibition. And so the TV format was kind of something that we came up with almost as like a natural format for the kinds of works that we were most interested in. We're going to talk a little bit around kind of these times, focusing quite heavily on London, and kind of the things that were happening simultaneously. Is this we just let this play out.
Hi, welcome to BYOB London. This is LuckyPDF Television. I'm Ben Vickers, and I'm NikkiCarvel.com.
Yeah, that's just to get a sense of like the aesthetic.
So preceding this, we worked on multiple projects that used different distribution platforms.
No.
Anyway.
That's great.
Anyway, yeah. So I guess similar to the time that we were beginning LuckyPDF TV. On the other side of London was beginning a project called Boiler Room.
Yeah, so basically the TV show project was an opportunity for us to frame content that we were interested in producing, but also distributing to a larger than local audience in a gallery space. So we used live broadcasting and coincided with the development of live stream and various platforms which you could co-opt for the distribution of your content. Boiler Room at the same time was doing a similar thing, but with a much more reduced strategy. It's just one camera, video recording, a DJ set, and it's live, so the proposition is you can't make it to the club or the bedroom. They take place in very domestic spaces mostly, or they certainly did when they first started out. Intimate gigs, no ticketing, free entry, but all guestless. And I think the reason we are interested in this model is that we're trying to do a similar thing, and we're asking ourselves, why is Boiler Room more successful than we are in terms of audience? We're thinking, is it because the content is music and that's more accessible, it's more
mass
market, but it's perhaps because it's a less engaged audience in terms of our TV shows require. I mean, they don't. You can put this on the background on YouTube. There's a lot of parallels. This idea of introducing people into our social space creating an environment people would want to be at, and trying to, in a way, create a space without, without creating the platform that becomes a vehicle for our contemporaries. And some of the ways that we did it was, with our TV show, was it's worth saying that the TV show was an endpoint of multiple projects that tried to create different we used different platforms. We used advertising spaces, magazine production, and we had a physical space, and the TV show was the most successful in reaching new audiences.
I think something that's maybe important to say about the difference between the TV shows that we were doing and what Boiler Room was doing. Boiler Room's business model is the shows, the parties are free, the drinks at the parties are free, it's streamed online for free, and then they make money back through sponsorship. Whereas we kind of had a reverse model where we were doing parties. People were coming to parties. That was how we raised funds to then pay for the production of the TV shows that we were making. And after that, they weren't really commercializable in the same way that something like Boiler Room was, because in large part because it had this I guess mass market potential. So brands like Ray-Ban, for example, and Reebok are very happy to fund this kind of activity, whereas artist groups trying to access those kind of large brand advertising budgets is a bit more complicated. You don't necessarily end up in very good positions with those companies. That's what they're trying.
I think the idea. So if let's get back to the BYB.
Should we play the interview?
Is this idea that we're thinking we're not chasing ratings, and it occurred to us after the fact in some ways. Although our content we like it, really what we were starting to realise is that we were actually building an audience that we thought was worth something if it was self-contained. If it never reached an outside audience, we've empowered our immediate friendship group, our peers, our contemporaries, by respecting them, saying you're legitimate. It's a different strategy, I think, to the YBAs or that's anybody who preceded, our sort of era of DIY art groups or people putting on exhibitions in their, in their houses. Because in a way, I think the psychology was not, and we started just immediately after the financial crash, and so although we probably weren't aware of it at the time, I think there was a culture of having to create your own spaces for the production and presentation of your work. Galleries weren't taking risks with younger artists, and I think that's the context within which we developed the project.
I think, we want to talk maybe a little bit about one of the successes of Boiler Room being that it's a very easily reproducible format, and then maybe the video we showed at the beginning is based around this event called BROB, which was founded by two artists, Raphael Rosendahl and Anna de Vries.
From Holland. Hello, Anna. I have a question for you. Are you an internet artist?
No, I don't think I can be categorized as an internet artist. No. We're all internet artists, or to a certain degree. If you use the internet, you're part of it, but you take part of it. But I'm not a typical internet artist, of course.
Thank you very much.
So what's going on here is we're basically trying to create a framing device for the working relationships that we saw going on with our friends and peers. There was multiple conversations going on online, and there were rare opportunities to actually meet some of your contemporaries. I think, especially since if there's funding is less available for travel, this sort of thing. So I think people are starting to, but nobody removes themselves from these international conversations. They just extend it online. And we're sort of at this point Facebook is maturing, and the way the dynamics of relationships which are built on Facebook are starting to be mimicked in our own real-world relationships. And certainly BYOB, which is a format that anybody can adopt, but it's
the format, just in case anyone doesn't know, is that you bring your own projector or beamer to a space, and everyone can show their work all at the same time. So it's specifically for, like, again, another format for attempting to exhibit video or internet art.
Yeah, there's a couple of dynamic things going on with it, which is we were sort of inspired by, which is that when you really, BYB, for example, we were doing projects at the same time, and we're always trying to create umbrellas under which groups of work, groups of people who are making similar work can exist within by association. So just by assuming the name or identifying with a certain movement, it's for the betterment of all the people within that movement, and by identifying as part of a moment in history, I think it was a useful vehicle for a lot of our contemporaries to meet each other, but also to frame what they're doing. And BYOB was a good way of locating people, but it structurally also did that. It was a vehicle for the founders, with the original condition of doing with BYOB. Of course, BYOB's been going on all the time, but it's just it's essentially a branding exercise, creating something that's like a franchisable model. The condition was that you fly Raphael to the opening. And of course, this is a bit of a ruse and unsustainable, and people started to do their own BYOBs because participation using this format was popularized. But and at the same time, extending this idea of a model that is an open source gallery show strategy. It was almost the death of it. So it's a great idea because everybody who does a BYOB becomes a brand advocate of Raphael. It becomes the context for the conversation at these events. Participation in them was seen as a bit of a badge of honour, and a sort of rite of passage within the post-internet art scene. And it's good for him to locate himself within that. And certainly when we author projects working with multiple people, for example, a television show, in many ways we're trying to adopt their cultural capital as well. This wasn't something we did cynically, but it was only after having done a couple of projects we recognised the potency of that. And so unknowingly we were sort of creating these social spaces with exhibitions, TV shows, etc., commissioning, that was collectivizing our scene and locating ourselves within that. And with our TV show from BYOB, for example, it's like we're historicising something that's taking place because we think it's a legitimate thing that needs a document to survive. And that's true of the TV shows. And certainly one of the reasons I think people enjoy them is because it's this idea of I want to be there. And that's true of Boiler Room and BYB and our projects.
Maybe just something to say about BYB. It was kind of I guess taking like an open source culture model to attribution, kind of share alike licensing, so anybody could do one, as long as they mentioned that it was founded by Raphael. That kind of led to maybe quite quickly. I mean, originally it was operating within a very small group of artists who knew each other online. Later on, it became quite popularized. It became like they still happen all the time a lot. They're still kind of referencing back to Raphael, and they're kind of aggregated on the website. But it's maybe it like moved outside of like a closed network of peer validation, and in some ways, like the concept of BYOB definitely is pretty uncool in certain like artist circles, but people are still doing it a lot. And perhaps that kind of attribution has in the long run has a negative effect on the authors. But then for Raphael, he's kind of successfully managed to operate outside of kind of this closed artistics peer group, therefore like doing kind of billboard commercials for Ford and things like this. So that kind of, we're going to talk a little bit more about peer validation later on. So the kind of peer validation is important, but only within that peer group, I guess. But maybe expand.
this is the format of our talk that we're going to be paralleling these operating models that we use, and hopefully sometimes successfully harness the same power that they have for congregating people around certain ideas, social scenes. And also, I think we've become very aware as well that these social scenes cement the big person's relevance to a wider audience, because if you have if you are present, there's an implication of your relevance by there's a sort of critical mass of people participating, both viewing, in both and also in production, and that creates an environment which is self-validating.
I guess a follow-up project for us to the TV projects we were doing was something that we made called School of Global Art. School of Global Art was it actually came mostly out of a series of commissions that we had, starting with like a PowerPoint commission by Victoria Campbell. Later, what you're looking at now is an iteration that happened during a time we spent on residency in Melbourne, Australia in May 2012. The idea of school, in Melbourne it was very much, there was a classroom and we organised a series of Skype in lectures, but also Skype out lectures. There was things happening in the room that we were broadcasting, online broadcasting to specific spaces elsewhere in the world, but kind of also bringing a lot of people into a conversation within an installation, within an exhibition. A lot of this for us was about creating. One, it was building a platform to exhibit work, performance work again, but also kind of performative lectures and writing as well, work that we felt were interested in trying to present better. And also about creating a context around our work and the work of our peers, that kind of, again, this idea of peer validation through building these conversations and building connections between people as well.
One of the motivations was that we recognised that our conversations with friends, which in some ways became the material of our work. It's not really true to say that our work was, like I said, a social engineering project, and it was a sort of immaterial practice, although that was becoming legitimised around the same sort of time, or at least have been for a while. But there's a popularisation of terms like memes, where seemingly a lot of our peers were just talking, and that was their work, and we were always trying to think of a product, how we could export it outside of our immediate network, find vehicles to reach wider audiences. And by adopting some of the aesthetics of, for example, a school or a television show, it does that. It takes it assumes the same credibility, or at least that was our intention, that some of these, for example, the School of Global Art, it's like an online learning space based on, or rather inspired by, these sort of off-site university campuses. When you have a LSE in Hong Kong or what have you, there's still your association with the space by attending. You carry its capital with you. So
the web element of this project, although it was hosted on Disc Magazine, but the slidey bit you can see, that's kind of stolen from the website of the University of New York, Abu Dhabi. And just with our kind of content filled into the places. And in some ways, School of Global Art was kind of an exercise in branding, suggesting that learning how to make art was something that was already happening naturally through the internet with a lot of group of artists, and we're kind of almost like rebranding the whole of the internet as the School of Global Art, but also looking in some ways at how education itself in some ways becomes emptied of its content, and simply becomes this branding where what you stick into your university isn't really as important as building the brand of that university, and kind of in certain ways adopting kind of the language of corporate education, the language of massive online open courses and things like that.
Yeah. But it also provided a reader for our own work as some people have done similar projects like Katja Novichkovac's post-internet survival guide, for example, aggregated multiple essays about post-internet art, and in a way what we were trying to do is both find a space which could be artwork, but it was also operated as a compendium, a sort of it could run alongside our practice. It was both practice, but it was also a way of creating a framework of conversation that legitimized our own practice. So we weren't looking for that kind of peer or institutional review. We were creating an institution that could also review our own work, make it valid, and sort of formalize the things that were implicit about the work by literally having people write essays on a subject that was informing the way that we were making work.
What you're doing it now is a much more recent project, now is our most recent project, which was a film we made over the summer, a series of interviews based around the idea of I guess the original ideas about artists leaving London and us travelling to track them down and find out how it is. But equally, kind of extensive, kind of more broader conversations about how artists outside of kind of cultural cores relate to those cultural cores, how people build smaller artistic scenes, artistic networks within places, and how those link up and connect. So I mean,
it's doing a similar thing, in as much as what we're trying to do is become a framing device for a conversation that's taking place already, to give it the sort of platform that we think will do it justice, but also to own the space of own the voices. So this is a prescient conversation in London that's becoming unaffordable rents for non-commercial creatives. Is a hot topic. People, gentrification, the idea of dispossession, it's one of the conversations that's it's this hot topic in London. And what we wanted to do is legitimize our peer group's voice within that by adding to the wider cultural social discourse about these subjects and legitimize those voices.
I guess it's also a case of creating an artwork as an opportunity for network building, in a way, an opportunity for us to meet people and join up conversations and kind of bring together conversations that we know are happening, but kind of maybe need interconnecting.
Yeah, that's always been a motivation, and I think it's quite important, and especially when we were thinking of in terms of why don't we just change our content so that it's more desirable. With the Boiler Room versus LuckyPDF TV debate. This idea, actually, what we're trying to do is serve our producers much more than we are to serve our audience. And to do that, although we have a responsibility to try to attract as many viewers as possible, and we need to own the spaces where people are seeing the content because it's commissioned and we're collaborating with other people to produce it. In many ways, what we're actually trying to do is say your peer group is a legitimate one. You don't need any review beyond your peer review. By congregating in these spaces, your work is valuable, and the more people that can congregate in those spaces, the more valuable the work and the more relevant it is. And hopefully that its presence will grow, and its influence will extend beyond that immediate social network. And as John said, with this project and with all of our projects, we're thinking how not so much what can we gift to the world in a way. That's a pompous artist proposition. But what can the world give us? We're thinking, how can we engineer situations with exhibition budgets, with our own networks, infrastructures that will serve our travel desires, our opportunity to work and meet new people, even if it's doing a party, you want to invite a DJ from Berlin or New York to DJ at one of our parties. And in doing so, we're trying to extend our own position within the wider network, I suppose, but for the better, so that we can be a good agent for the content that we advocate is good.
Yes, so I guess, I mean, perhaps in some ways, the primary audience for this video is the people we interviewed, and that's the work, and then there's certain documentations that appear online in the gallery exhibition, they have other audiences, but I think maybe, yeah, our first commitment is to the internal audiences of the work, or the internal audiences of the network.
I think the conditions at Create Massachusetts, like that, unapologetically, quite well. We're keen to exploit the institution in some ways, in an attempt to readdress, balance the power dynamic between artist and institution, which we think is really important. And we consider ourselves essentially service providers when we do exhibitions in various spaces. It's about this has got to be interesting for us as a learning space, most explicitly with the School of Global Art, but with all of our projects. And yeah, if it wasn't, I don't think we'd be interested. And I think it comes out of not this idea that we don't really want to wait for a project that will be worthy. I think that the sort of the projects that that preceded the financial crash was sort of the last, the sort of dying era of public funding for the arts, and there was a wider culture of enterprise and entrepreneurship with your art practice.
We're missing 2 slides from the presentation, but I'm also conscious of time, and maybe I don't know. So the Brian Chesky and the Amazon diagram.
I think it's fine.
Okay.
So what you're about to see is the embodiment of some of these ideas, but commercialized. One of the co-founders of Airbnb talking about their ideological motivation for Airbnb. It's quite an insight, and it's motivated by something that came through.
I think it's the currency of trust. And that used to live only with a business. Only businesses could be trusted, or people in your local community. Now that trust has been democratized. Any person can act like a brand.
The rest of this is like just as good as that. But I think we kind of just wanted to draw out that little bit. So that obviously there's a theme running through our work about this idea of branding. And I think it's interesting to see how perhaps ideas like personal brand that come from, or I would say probably come from like artistic, come from art, are now like appearing in startup business ideology. I think for us, it's quite important that like the branding we do is not individual branding. It's about branding groups of people, or like creating brands that allow groups of people to come together, creating kind of umbrellas that people can choose to be part of, and using those as tools for connecting people rather than some idea of kind of like the corporatization of the self, of like the individual.
But in many ways, something that we're interested in is the structural strategies that brands or corporations use for the way that they make whatever they make, what they sell. But we're not so interested necessarily in the financial side of things necessarily. So the reason the Airbnb sort of philosophy is interesting to us is that it does other things. It does serves other social functions. Certainly that's what Brian's advocate or suggests. And we try to do that too. These structures are transparent. We're always thinking about product first. So in many ways, the reason we work together is because we want the outcome to be the best it can be, and that means working with other people. Depending on how you measure best, obviously, so, a lot of artists, the quality of the work is determined by the singularity of the voice. But for us, we just want to create good work. So although we're trying to both brand certain behaviours that are already happening in art, in creative by artists. We're also trying to adopt some of the structures that these brands use to make better work.
I think there's something. This is, if anyone hasn't seen this before, this is a diagram of the business model of Amazon.com, and I think it's interesting to compare. Like, there's interesting differences between what Airbnb is, what it does, and how it thinks about itself, to what Amazon is, what it does, and what it thinks about itself. Basically, and Brian Chesky says this quite explicitly in the later on in that little video clip, that it's not about Airbnb. It's not about building infrastructure. Cities already built all the infrastructure you need generations ago. All you need now is the internet. Which is like, again, it's problematic, I think. Amazon, I would say, is quite significantly different in that Amazon does build infrastructure. It has this growth model where all its income goes into all its revenue goes back into expanding its infrastructure, and that infrastructure is warehouses and web servers. I think the important thing in that is that Amazon, that's not a closed system. Amazon allows other businesses to use its warehouse spaces, to use its logistics for distribution, also allows other online companies to use the technology developed to run Amazon to do other things. So, for example, maybe not Tumblr anymore, but definitely Vimeo still use Amazon's storage because it's the cheapest storage, because Amazon have this scale that allows them to do things cheaper, and they're not interested in making profit, they're interested in expanding their business. People, I know, people have some issues with Amazon. I'm like, I think it's a lot more interesting than Airbnb as like a model for following. In that vein, we now I don't know if this is gonna work. This might work. We made a GIF and it didn't work. But
what kind of person to ask?
I know, but it's fine. So we tried to think about that growth model of Amazon and how it might map onto the ideas we have about what we do.
We haven't quite figured out why the instinct of young artists is to accumulate audience rather than make money. Or rather, that seems to be our motivation. I think maybe it's because it's perceived to be a prerequisite to becoming successful, but perhaps it's also that none of us thought we could ever make any money as artists. So we thought, at the time anyway, and certainly and not now either for us. But it's like, well, what other kind of valuable things can we accumulate? And social world I think it's a good one.
So there's an idea within what we're going to loosely call the LuckyPDF network, which is, anyway, you can be part of that even if you don't know it.
Let's just talk through our schematic.
So we like to think that ideas come out of conversation, ideas come out of working with people, and that a larger network, a more interconnected network, is a generator of more ideas.
Yeah, I like this idea of it being like nuclear fusion, more accelerated, hits. That space was once Parisian cafes, but now it's the internet, and that's where we need to be located so that we can be bouncing those ideas around, and in a certain amount of time, hopefully those ideas will get better and better the more people you talk to and see.
And it's important that within that network, within those ideas generation, they're peer validated, so they're like peer critiqued, but they're also like it's an internal system that decides the quality of the work.
Of course, like participating in a group conversation, it will do that. Your work is located, you implicate yourselves in an ongoing conversation, and that will dictate what that conversation is, and therefore, leads to peer validation, something that's useful because... we like to think that we built a kind of
from building a strong network, like audience attention. Attention comes from that. People kind of, because a group of people are talking about each other, that other people are listening to those kind of conversations, building kind of a profile of a group.
Yeah, your network becomes a personal brand advocate.
Yeah.
So that leads us to
audience attention, which is obviously something that's a good thing, we think. Audiences are good for art, for various reasons. But also like audiences and profile building to kind of grow the network. Out of the audience comes opportunity, and by this we mean opportunities coming from outside of this network, so opportunities from invitations from institutions, from galleries, and also opportunities to meet people, and again kind of like
to meet new people, which leads back to ideas generation. So you're saying how this is a growth model now.
One of the things, one of the benefits of opportunity is money. Money allows production, the kind of production that wouldn't necessarily have been possible if you were in a completely closed network, because outside funds can allow you to
make better work.
Yeah, produce work, produce work at higher quality, and those aren't more money, higher quality, and better work aren't necessarily synonymous, but like money is very helpful for making work.
And they don't necessarily lead to greater profile, but we'd like to think that it could.
Yeah,
it doesn't as much as that's what often reaches the mainstream audience.
Yeah.
The auction sale price.
Well, yeah, or even like a certain like level of production value is maybe more like exchangeable within the media.
Like the smoke and mirrors business of art, the more it costs, the better it may be perceived to be. I hope we're not advocating that.
However, there are some issues with this, and those are to do with how energy leaves the system and ways in which energy leaves the system. So the idea that when a profile is great enough, peer validation becomes less important than external validation, and so kind of like whether your friends all think you're making good work is less important than whether you get a good review of the work, which kind of maybe has like there's a negative effect on that kind of the integrity of that network. Profile can lead to things like gallery representation, and then you're not reliant on the network for maintaining that profile or maintaining that presence. You have people you have like professionalized that side of your network, and you have people whose job it is to say you're an interesting artist.
So this isn't necessarily a useful or good financial model. The only thing it's good for is growing the network.
Yeah.
As you know, there are still the gatekeepers of gallery sales and representation in public media.
So there's lots of ways in which energy will leave this network. A lot of that I'd say, often that is to do with money and people trying to take like individual benefit from shared resources, maybe. But yeah, so that's the LuckyPDF network growth model. That's what we came to share with you today.